Good morning, my beautiful stars, and welcome back to the next installment of episode 1, part 2, C and D, about organized religion. Please do like, share, comment, and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on the next installment. And here we go. Let us start today. Episode 1, part 2, C. By the beginning of the 4th century, the Roman Empire was under enormous strain. Civil wars had weakened its foundations. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Economic hardships pressed across the provinces. Old religious traditions no longer united the empire as they once had. Rome faced a problem. Every great empire eventually encounters. How do you hold together a people who no longer share a common story? An empire can enforce laws, it can collect taxes, it can build roads, but without a shared identity, even the strongest empire begins to fracture and they lose control. Into the uncertain world stepped Constantine. Few figures in Christian history have inspired more admiration or more controversy. After emerging victories in a struggle for imperial power, Constantine gradually embraced Christianity and in 313 CE, together with Licinius, issued what is now known the Edict of Milan. Rather than making Christianity the official religion of the empire, the edict granted Christians and others greater freedom to practice their faith after periods of persecution. For Christians who had lived under constant threat of imprisonment or execution, this changed everything. Churches, structures could be built openly. Communities could gather without fear. Sacred texts could be copied and shared more freely. For many believers, it felt like a new dawn. Yet, history often reminds us that with every gift brings new questions. When a faith that once stood outside imperial power suddenly finds itself welcomed by that power, note, by that power, how does it change? And perhaps more importantly, how does power change the faith? How does power control the faith? Constantine did not inherit a unified church. Across the empire, Christian communities still... Apologies, my mic just cut out. Let's continue. Across the empire, Christian communities still differed on important questions. Some disagreements concerned theology, others concerned leadership. Still, others involved how to interpret the life and teachings of Jesus. To an emperor seeking stability, division posed a serious problem. Religious disagreements could easily become political disagreements. Political disagreements could become unrest. From Constantine's perspective, unity was not merely a theological ideal, but also a form of control. It was a practical necessity. This helps explain why he became deeply involved in disputes within the church. Not necessarily because he wished to define every point of doctrine himself, but because a divided church threatened a divided empire, and an empire that is divided cannot control. History shows that rulers have often sought unity through shared institutions. Sometimes this has brought peace. Sometimes it has silenced important voices. Sometimes it is divided. Often it has done all three. History now gives way once more to symbolism. In the language of the Major Arcana, this moment represents the emperor. The emperor is not evil. He represents order, structure, responsibility, the building of civilization. Without the emperor, roads are never built. Laws are never written. Communities remain vulnerable to chaos. Every healthy society requires some measure of his strength. Yet, every archetype has a shadow. The emperor's shadow emerges when order becomes control, when stability becomes rigidity, when protecting unity leaves little room for difference. Note, little room for difference. The challenge is timeless. How does a society remain united without demanding absolute uniformity? How do institutions preserve shared values without silencing sincere questions? History offers no easy answer, but it reminds us that these questions matter because they shape nations, religions, families, and sometimes the human heart itself. The relationship between church and empire had entered a new chapter. What began as a persecuted movement was becoming an institution with unprecedented influence. Soon, bishops from across the Christian world would gather to address questions that had divided believers for generations. Their decisions would shape Christian history for centuries to come. Some would see those councils as preserving the faith. Others would see them as narrowing the faith. Others would see them as dividing the faith. Whatever one's perspective, their impact cannot be overstated. The story of those councils is where our journey will next continue. Episode 1, Part 2D. There is a saying that has echoed throughout history. Power rarely changes overnight. It changes relationships. By the beginning of the 4th century, the relationship between Christianity and political power had fundamentally changed. For nearly 300 years, many Christian communities had existed on the margins of the Roman society. Some experienced periods of peace, while others endured persecution. Their leaders were often teachers, shepherds, and martyrs rather than political advisors. Now, for the first time, Christianity found itself standing beside imperial authority instead of outside of it. This new relationship would transform both the church and the empire. It is important to understand this transformation did not happen because of one meeting, one emperor, or one decree. History is rarely that simple. Instead, it unfolded over generations through thousands of decisions made by bishops, emperors, theologians, and ordinary believers, to the lesser extent. Yet, one event has come to symbolize this turning point more than any other: the Council of Nicaea. In the year 325 CE, bishops from across Roman Empire gathered in the city of Nicaea. Popular culture often portrays this council as the moment the Bible was written or Christianity was invented. Neither claim is supported by historical evidence. The books that now make up the New Testament had already been circulating among Christian communities for generations. Many churches were already reading the 4 Gospels and the letters of Paul and other writings a long time before Nicaea convened. The council's primary purpose was different. It sought to address deep disagreements concerning the nature of Christ, disagreements that threatened not only the unity of the church, but also the stability of the empire that had begun to identify itself with that church. For Constantine, religious division carried political consequences, and political consequences can lead to a downfall. A divided church could become a divided empire. For many bishops, however, this issue was not politics alone. They sincerely believed that preserving what they understood to be the truth about Christ mattered profoundly. History reminds us that people can pursue unity from genuine conviction while also creating unintended consequences and division. Not every Christian community agreed with the direction the church was taking. Some groups continued to preserve writings such as the Gospels of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and other texts that emphasized inner transformation and mystical insights. Others believed these writings risked leading believers away from the teachings handed down by the apostles. These disagreements were real, they were passionate, and they shaped the future of Christianity. Over time, the church increasingly distinguished between writings considered authoritative for public worship and those considered useful only for private reflection, or not appropriate at all. The biblical canon emerged gradually through centuries of use, debate, and disagreements. It was not the product of a single vote or a single emperor's command. Yet, as institutional authority grew stronger, I repeat, the space for alternative interpretations grew smaller. The church that had once continued remarkable diversity increasingly spoke with one public voice. To many believers, this brought clarity and stability. To others, it marked the beginning of a narrowing of the spiritual expression. History records both perspectives. This is where we pause once again and we stepped into the Major Arcana. The High Priestess invited us inward. She reminded us that wisdom often begins in silence, contemplation, and direct experiences. The Hierophant gathered the wisdom into a community. He preserved teachings. He established traditions. He ensured that knowledge could survive from one generation to the next. Now another figure joins them, the emperor. The emperor builds institutions. He creates order from uncertainty. He establishes law. He protects borders. Without the emperor, civilizations struggle to endure. Without the Hierophant, traditions are easily forgotten. Without the High Priestess, however, institutions risk forgetting why they were created in the first place. When these archetypes exist in balance, society flourishes. When one dominates the other, imbalance begins. The High Priestess without the Hierophant cannot become isolated mysticism. The Hierophant without the High Priestess becomes an empty ritual. The emperor without either can become control for its own sakes. Perhaps one of history's enduring lessons is not that these archetypes are enemies, but they require that they work together and they rely on one another. The challenge has always been maintaining that balance. The series is not asking you to reject organized religion, nor is it asking you to abandon your faith. Many people have found profound love, healing, and purpose within religious communities. Many churches, monasteries, and faith traditions have preserved learnings, cared for the poor, built hospitals, advanced education, and inspired extraordinary acts of compassion. History deserves that acknowledgement. But history also asks us to look honestly at moments when institutions become more concerned with protecting authority than encouraging sincere spiritual inquiry. Those moments are not unique to Christianity. They can be found in almost every civilization. Whenever any institution's religious, political, or ideological begins believing it alone possesses all truth, curiosity becomes dangerous. Questions become threats. Differences becomes division. The institution slowly begins protecting itself instead of the people it was created to serve. That pattern belongs to not only one single religion. It belongs to human nature. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within the Nahomadi library is not that one group was entirely right and the other entirely wrong. Perhaps its greatest gift is that the reminder is that early Christianity was a living conversation. People wrestled with profound questions. They searched, they prayed, they disagreed, they sought understanding. And perhaps that conversation never truly ended. Perhaps it simply became quieter, waiting patiently beneath the sands of history until another generation was willing to listen again. As our journey continues, we leave behind the quiet libraries of Egypt and step into a world where intuition grows stronger, doctrine becomes more clearly defined, and the relationship between spiritual authority and political power perhaps reshapes civilization itself. The question is no longer simply, what did Jesus teach? The question becomes, who has the authority to decide what everyone else must believe? That question has echoed through nearly 2,000 years of history, and it still echoes today. And we will see you in the next episode to explore more and deeper and look at different nations and cultures and identities to better understand. And we will see how things change over time. The journey here has just begun. And I just want to end with the sentence again. The question becomes, who has the authority to decide what everyone else must believe? And with that, my dear friends, I will leave you until the next installment, and that will be for next week. Have a lovely weekend, and please enjoy the series. Do like, share, comment, and let us know what your thoughts are. Love you all. Goodbye.